Okay, so today we are reviewing this book, The Devil Wears Prada by Lauren Weisberger. Let's try and get it in the frame. It's a very glossy cover, and I do apologize for that. There we go. If you have not seen my reviews before, I do split them up into two sections. The first section is a spoiler-free section where I give you 3 pros and 3 cons about the book in question, and then we go over into a spoiler section where I can rant or gush about the book until my heart is content in a spoilery way. So let's start off with the spoiler-free version of this book, The Devil Wears Prada. Now, a little bit of I'll back up the truck a bit and give you a little bit of information about this book. First of all, it is I believe it's a YA, but it could be an adult story. I honestly don't know. So let's just skip the age rating and talk about that more in the monthly wrap-up. But for the purpose of the review, this is a contemporary book, and I gave it 5 stars. The premise of this book is that it follows a woman by the name of Andrea Sachs, who prefers to be called Andy, so we'll call her Andy. Andy Sachs applies for a job. She wants to be a writer at, oh gosh, I don't even remember, but a famous newspaper. She wants to be a writer for them. And she doesn't end up getting any work, so she applies for a job to be an assistant to Miranda Priestley, who is the editor-in-chief of Runway, a fashion magazine that is the most popular fashion magazine, at least in the United States. It might even be one of the most popular fashion magazines around the world. Miranda Priestley is very well known by so many people. So Andy applies for this job and is told very early on that she needs to survive this job, and I really do appreciate that she's told that, because the reason this book is called The Devil Wears Prada is because the CEO of Runway, Miranda Priestley, is looked upon as a devil in that she makes impossibly demanding requests of both of her assistants, Andrea, Andy, and her first assistant, Emily. So one of the most exciting things about this book is seeing all of the impossibly demanding requests that Miranda comes up with. In this review, at least in the spoiler section, I am going to be referring back and forth between the film and the book. I not only saw the film before I read the book, but I saw the film many times before I read the book, and I fell in love with the film, but it is very important to note that I saw the film first. So, yeah, that's basically the premise of the book. Let's get into the 3 cons for this book in a spoiler-free way. My first con for this book is the fact that it ended really suddenly. Oh my gosh. So I was listening to this book on audiobook, and I can't remember who the narrator was, but she did a really good job, I have to say. And I got to the end not knowing it was the end, and I'm listening away, and one of the advantages of listening to audiobooks is that I get to do other things while I'm doing that. So I was doing something while I was listening to it, and suddenly it stopped, and I thought, oh god, what's happened? Have I lost internet access? I mean, I don't think you need internet access with it, but anyway, that thought went through my mind. Have I lost internet access? Is someone calling? We're just getting to a really good part of the book, and then I looked and realized the book was over. So my first con is the book ends way too quickly, and I wanted more, so that's my first con. My second con for this book, and this is being really nitpicky, I had to look really hard to find another con because I love this book. I gave it 5 stars. My second con for this book is that there are little moments here and there, certainly not throughout the whole book, but just little moments here and there where Lauren Weisberger, she shows as well as tells. Now, for those of you who don't know the difference between show and tell, that's completely understandable because I didn't know it either until very recently, even though a lot of people would say that to me. You do showing in some of your books, and I was like, what do you mean showing? So here's the long story short. The difference between show and tell is if you are showing something in a book, you are having this moment play out in front of your readers. If you are telling something in a book, then you are having something occur off screen, so away from what the reader is reading, and it's being retold to the reader either by the narrator or one of the characters. So an example of showing something would be showing a character getting into an argument with another character. So you would see this back and forth. The first character approaches the second, they start bickering, they start having a full-on argument, and we are reading the argument as it is playing out. Where with telling, it would be that, say our main character is a friend of one of these two characters who had the argument, the friend comes up to our protagonist and says, yesterday I had a big argument with so-and-so, and they describe what happens. We're not there to see the action. In this book, there are moments where Lauren Weisberger does both, show and tell at the exact same time. One example is one of the minor things, one of the easiest things I think that Miranda Priestley gets Andy to do is to pick up coffee for her from Starbucks every day at 9 a.m. Excuse me. So in this example, Andrea's going to Starbucks, and in the internal monologue, she's thinking, you know, here I am once again, I'm walking to Starbucks at 9 a.m. like I do all the time. And then Lauren Weisberger breaks from that and says, this was something that I would do every day. Every day I will go to Starbucks at 9 a.m. to get coffee for Miranda. But you don't need to do that. It kind of takes me out of the book just a little bit. Like, as I say, I still gave the book 5 stars. It was amazing. So I'm just nitpicking here. But if you're going to show what's happening, which is definitely the preferred method to show rather than tell. If you're going to show what's happening, you don't then, in the very next sentence, back it up with telling what's happening, because we've already seen it. So it makes the point moot. That is my second con for this book. I don't have a third con because it was just so amazing. So let's move on to my pros for this book, of which there are many, but I'll just try and choose 3. My first pro for this book is that it is written in an easy writing style. I know if you've seen a lot of my reviews that I use this pro a lot of the time, but I think it's worthwhile to mention when it is an easy to read reading style, and this is. My second pro for this book is the impossible demands that Miranda Priestley places onto Andy Sachs. I always looked forward to seeing what the next impossible task would be, and I was always blown away by the expectations that Miranda Priestley would have, and it just made for such a fun book to read. My third pro for this book is the way that it ended. The climax of this book is so good. In the spoiler version, I'm going to talk about the difference between the climax of the book versus the climax of the film. There is a very, very, very big difference. And I prefer the way that the book ended compared to the way, the climax of the book compared to the climax of the film. But in the end, I gave this book, as I said a few times now, 5 stars. I really appreciate it. So let's get right into my spoiler review of this book, The Devil Wears Prada by Lauren Weisberger. If you're not joining me for the spoiler review, I completely understand. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you again soon. But for those of you hanging around for the spoiler version, let's get into it right now. Here is the spoiler version for my review of this book, The Devil Wears Prada by Lauren Weisberger. Okay, so normally I go into my spoiler reviews giving a detailed outline of what happened in the book. I'm not going to do that this time. I'm just going to spitball my thoughts and in a raving way, because I love this book so much. So again, I'm going to go back to the film and what I was saying in the spoiler-free version. I had seen the film before I read this book. Not only had I seen it, but I'd seen the film many times. I think Meryl Streep was the perfect actress to cast to play Miranda Priestley. She does it so well. I think that Emily Blunt plays the role of Emily really well, and I think Anne Hathaway was the perfect actress to play Andrea Sachs, in that she goes from the casually dressed and with morals writer that she is when she first arrives at Runway, to the fashionista who is fully obsessed with her job, to what happens in the end, which we're going to talk about very, very soon. The differences between the book and the film are many and varied. The book goes further than Andrea's life at Runway. So the film mostly revolves around Andrea performing her duties as a personal assistant. We have moments where we see her friends and her boyfriend, and they'll catch up for drinks or whatever, and we have like 1 or 2 minute scenes, and that's it. And we have a scene with her boyfriend, or a couple of scenes with her boyfriend, 1 or 2 minute scenes, and that's it. And a scene with her dad at one stage, where the book has half the focus being her at Runway and the other half being her at home life, where we really get to know her friend Lily, who ends up having a drinking problem, which causes a lot of chaos in Lily's life. We also end up getting to know a lot more about her family. Apparently, Andrea Sachs is Jewish. We did not know this in the film, but she is. And it's very evident because there's little things that she will say along the way, making comparison to things that are happening and comparing that to Jewish customs and traditions. So we have that as well. Her parents have a lot of love for her, but they're surprised she's working at a fashion magazine. Her dad seems to be a little more supportive than her mum. Her sister ends up getting married and having a child. Like, we see so much more that goes on behind the scenes of what she does at Runway in the book, and I really did appreciate that. Of course, we still have all of the issues that we have with Miranda and Andy playing out through the book as well. Now, one of the big moments in the film is that we're leading up to when Miranda is going to go away to Paris. And Emily in the film keeps talking about how much she can't wait to go, and everything about her is revolving around Paris. She even has that very famous line when she meets Andy at one of the events that they go to for Miranda, and Miranda comments on how thin Emily is, and Emily says, "Thank you, I have this new diet. I don't eat anything, and then when I feel like I'm about to faint, I eat a cube of cheese." And I was watching an interview recently after reading this book, so last night actually, with Meryl Streep, Anne Hathaway, and Stanley Tucci. And Anne was saying, I think Stanley Tucci was saying the cube of cheese line is his favourite line. And Anne Hathaway was saying her favourite line is the line after that, which I never recalled until now that Anne Hathaway's pointed out. I'm going to look for it next time. Where Emily then goes on to say, "I'm one stomach flu away from being my ideal weight." I mean, this shows the type of pressure that the staff of Runway are under. But Emily's doing everything she can to go to Paris with Miranda, and in the film, she ends up in an accident. A car runs her over, or a car hits her or something, so she ends up in hospital, so she can't go to Paris. In the book, Emily gets mono, so she's contagious, and therefore she can't go, and Emily gets her doctor to call Miranda, because obviously Miranda being, she just expects everything to work for her. The doctor needs to tell Miranda, no, she actually can't come. She's going to infect you. She is a risk to everyone if she comes with you to Paris. So Andy does still end up going. It's just very differently played out. While Andy is in Paris, she receives a phone call from her now ex, because Andy and her ex end up having a fight, and they end up leaving things a little bit in the air. They're not really broken up, and they're taking a really big break from each other, so very close to breaking up. And he calls her and leaves a message while she's busy, and her parents call her and leave a message whilst she's busy, and she calls her parents back first, and they let her know that her friend Lily, who has been having a lot of trouble with drinking, was in a car accident and she is unconscious. This affects Andy in a massive way. Despite the fact that Runway and being Miranda Priestley's assistant has fully taken over Andrea Sachs's life, now she's really concerned about Lily and wants to kind of, throw everything away and go home and be with Lily. But her dad is saying to her, look, she's unconscious right now. We don't think there's going to be any change anytime soon. You just finish up what you're doing in Paris and then come home. Her boyfriend basically guilt trips her and says, you need to come home. And one thing I don't understand, that I don't appreciate, is that mostly Andrea's friends don't appreciate her position, that she's working for such a demanding boss. Sorry. Yeah, so I don't appreciate that he's guilt tripping her, making her come home from Paris early, all because of her friend being in this accident. I get it, I do, but I don't know. I don't get that they don't understand the pressures that are put on her. So Andrea needs to decide what it is that she's going to do, and eventually, because she ends up originally deciding to stay in Paris, and she and Miranda are in a limo going somewhere, and she explains to Miranda what had happened to Lily, not expecting any response, but Miranda actually says to her, I really appreciate that you made this decision. It was the one human moment Miranda has with Andy. I really appreciate that you made this decision to stay in Paris. And I see a lot of myself in you. You're going really far. How long have you been working for me for? And by this point, she is really close to having worked for Miranda for a year. I think she's like 5 weeks away or something from it being a year. So she's really close. And she tells Miranda this, and Miranda says, well, you know what happens when girls work for me for over a year? They get promoted. So, again, Miranda's being really nice all of a sudden. But then something clicks, and Andy has to stand by an entrance door while Miranda is doing something in a room. She's at some party or something, and Andy goes outside for a moment to do something. I don't remember what it was. And then she gets a phone call from Miranda saying, where are you? You were meant to be standing at the door and you're not at the door, and da da da. Andy comes back in. She stands at the door, and Miranda comes towards her looking livid, and if looks could kill, Andy would be dead. And in that moment, Andy breaks, and it is amazing. So throughout, to set this up, throughout the film as well as the books, Miranda never acknowledges Andrea at all. And Andrea even says in the film, and I really appreciate this line, she says it to Stanley Tucci's character, if I do something right, she doesn't acknowledge it. But if I do something wrong, she is vicious. And it's true. She also has these impossible expectations that she always ends the myriad of impossible expectations with the two words, that's all. And Meryl Streep just does this really well. If you've seen the film and haven't read the book, you know what I mean. Like, she's like, do this, do that, do that. That's all. You know? I don't want any more comments. Go away. That's all. So, and so back at this party where if looks could kill, Andrea would be dead, Andrea breaks because Miranda goes up to her. I almost said Meryl goes up to her because this doesn't happen in the film. It happens in the book. Miranda goes up to her and says, what did you think you were doing? Do you know how embarrassing this is for me that my personal assistant can't stand by the door and can't do a simple task? And, you know, the sort of things she always says. And basically, Andrea, who's had enough and, you know, snaps by now, I'm not going to swear, so I'll just say F. Andrea says, you know what? F you, Miranda, she says in a calm voice. And then she stops caring that anyone else can hear her and she yells it loudly. Miranda's like, what did you say? She goes, I said, F you, Miranda. That's all. And then she leaves. It is so good. Oh my God. Because in the film, they're coming back from, hang on, I could be wrong here. I thought they were coming back from Paris, but they might still be in Paris in the film. But in my mind, they've come back to America when this happens. They're in the limo, so let me know in the comments below if I'm wrong there, because I always thought they'd come back home. But anyway, they're in the limo, and Miranda has betrayed Stanley Tucci's character because he was going to work with James Holt, but that would mean that she was going to be kicked out of Runway. If you've seen the film, you know what I'm referring to. And Andrea says to Miranda, I could never do what you did, because it's this moment in the film where Miranda says, I see myself in you, and Andrea says, I could never do what you did to whatever his name is, and I can't remember his name, Stanley Tucci's character. And Miranda says, well, yes, you did it to Emily, which if you've seen the film, you know what that's referring to, and if you haven't watched the film, it's really good. And then when they get to when the limo starts pulling up to where they're going, Miranda says, you did what you had to do to get ahead. And Andrea says, well, maybe I don't want this. And Miranda says to Andrea, oh, oh, don't be like that, Andrea, or something like that. Everybody wants to be us. And then she gets out, Miranda gets out of the limo to go wherever she's going. Andrea opens the door on her side and walks away, and then Miranda starts calling her, and she throws her phone into the fountain and just keeps on walking. It's very anticlimactic, which is fine. I still appreciate the moment. Yay, Andy's walking away. I thought it was really good. But in the book, the fact that she gave it to Miranda was so good, and I kind of wish that that had happened in the film. I like, even if she didn't swear, even if she said, you know, screw you or something, or stuff you, but, you know, I guess with films you can say screw you. So if she said, screw you, Miranda, screw you, that's all, and then left, it would have been so much better. So I think the book had a much better climax ending than the film. In saying that, this was so much fun for me to read. Not necessarily for the sake of Andrea's journey. I'm gonna be very clear with that. Not necessarily because of Andrea's journey, but because I was always looking forward to seeing the next impossible task that Miranda was going to put Andy to doing. And it just gets bigger and bigger. These tasks start off with being so small. Go to Starbucks and get me a coffee. Go to this restaurant and get me my meal. Go and get my magazines that I want to read. It's really simple. By the time we get to, you know, Paris or, by the time we get to Paris, it's so complicated. Get this, I need you to organize 6 chefs for me to interview, and I want to interview one of them by tonight. They must be this. And so, and Andrea calls Emily, and she's like, okay, Emily, she needs us to hire, like, she needs us to get 6 chefs that cook French food for her, excuse me. And Emily says, well, does she want to interview them in Paris, or does she want to interview them back here? And Andrea says, what, you think I asked her that? Because, and in the film, we see this play out really well. Miranda asks Andrea early on to pick her up something like 12 to 14 skirts from Calvin Klein. And Andrea says to Miranda, oh, okay, what type of skirts? You know, a very simple question and a very understandable one at that. What type of skirts do you want me to get? And Miranda's response is, oh, please bore someone else with your questions. They had to cast Meryl Streep. She did it so well. But as I said, I don't remember the narrator who did this book on Audible, but she does Miranda really well. So I definitely recommend reading the book, but I also recommend listening to the audio version because it's just really good. I'm going to end this here because I don't think there's much more that I need to say. I really liked this book. I liked everything about it. It got 5 stars. Now, there is one more thing, actually, that I do want to say. There is a second book in the series. It's a duology, which I did not know, and I'm so excited about. It is called I believe it's called The Revenge Wears Prada, something like that. The Revenge Wears Prada, The Devil Returns, I think it's called. And I got so excited when I found that out. And then I looked online to see if they'd made a movie of the second one because of how much I loved the first one. But Meryl Streep and Anne Hathaway have both gone on record saying, we won't do another film. Meryl said something like, the first film was really good and we should just leave it at that. When I'm not going to do a sequel. So they're not doing the sequel, but there is a second book in the series. So best believe I'm going to be reading the second book. Because, it's so good. Anyway, I love this. It got 5 stars, and I highly recommend it for anyone who just wants to read a book and have fun and just, read a book where you're anticipating, you're on the edge of your seat anticipating the next impossible task that Miranda's going to set. So, pick it up, read it, and let me know what you think of it. If you've read it, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. But that is the end of my review of The Devil Wears Prada by Lauren Weisberger. I'm letting you guys go with peace, blessings, and so much love. Mwah! I post videos every Thursday and Sunday with reviews and other videos in between, and I'll see you again very soon. Thank you so much for watching, and happy reading. Bye, guys. Bye.